The morning sun painted golden streaks across the marble floor of the luxury apartment building on Fifth Avenue. Victoria Sterling stood by her floor-to-ceiling windows, watching people hurry along the sidewalk below. From 40 floors up, they looked like tiny ants scurrying about their daily lives. She envied them. At least they had somewhere important to go. Victoria had everything money could buy. Designer clothes filled 3 walk-in closets. Her garage housed 5 luxury cars she rarely drove. The penthouse apartment overlooked Central Park, complete with original artwork worth millions hanging on the walls. Yet as she sipped her morning coffee from a cup that cost more than most people's monthly rent, she felt empty inside. Her phone buzzed on the marble counter. Another text from her father. "Remember what we discussed. 6 months, Victoria. Find a husband or the company goes to charity." She tossed the phone aside and walked to her piano. The beautiful black Steinway had belonged to her grandmother, one of the few things in her life that held real meaning. Victoria ran her fingers over the keys but didn't play. She couldn't concentrate on music when her future hung in the balance like this. At 28, Victoria had never experienced real love. Men approached her constantly, but she could see the dollar signs in their eyes. They wanted her money, her connections, her family name. None of them cared about the lonely woman behind all the wealth. Her father owned Sterling Pharmaceuticals, a company worth billions. He had built it from nothing, working 16-hour days for decades. Now he wanted to retire and pass everything to Victoria, but only if she married someone he considered suitable, someone from their social circle, someone with the right background and connections. Marriage is a business arrangement, he always said. Love is a luxury we can't afford when billions are at stake. Victoria disagreed, but arguing with her father was like trying to stop a hurricane with an umbrella. He had made up his mind and nothing would change it. 40 floors below, David Chen was starting another day at his job. He had been working as a doorman at the Meridian Tower for 3 years, ever since his life completely changed. The uniform fit him well, navy blue with gold buttons and white gloves that he kept spotless. Residents expected perfection, even from someone they barely noticed. David opened doors, carried packages, helped elderly residents with their groceries, and answered questions with a polite smile. To most people walking through that lobby, he was invisible, just part of the building, like the marble columns or the crystal chandelier hanging overhead. But David hadn't always been invisible. 3 years ago, he was studying at one of the most prestigious music schools in the country. Piano had been his life since childhood. His parents had sacrificed everything to pay for his education, working double shifts at their small restaurant to afford his tuition and lessons. Then everything changed in a single phone call. The accident happened on a rainy Tuesday evening. His parents were driving home from the restaurant when a drunk driver ran a red light. Both died instantly. David's world collapsed. The funeral costs, medical bills, and legal fees wiped out everything. He had to sell his piano, the one his parents bought him for his 18th birthday, just to pay for their burial. His younger sister Amy was only 16 then. She had dreams of becoming a doctor, just like their mother had wanted to be before she gave up her studies to raise her family. David couldn't let Amy's dreams die too, so he dropped out of school, found whatever work he could, and made sure his sister could finish high school and eventually go to college. Now Amy was in her 3rd year of medical school, and David worked nights as a doorman to pay her tuition. During the day, he took online business classes, hoping to build a better future for both of them. His own dreams of performing on stage seemed like memories from another lifetime. Most residents treated David like he wasn't there. They would talk on their phones right in front of him, discussing private matters as if he couldn't hear. Some were kind. The elderly Mrs. Patterson always asked about his sister, and Mr. Rodriguez from the 15th floor would slip him $20 at Christmas. But others acted like he was beneath their notice. Victoria Sterling was different, though David couldn't quite figure out how. She was polite, always said please and thank you, but she seemed sad somehow. He had worked in this building long enough to recognize the difference between people who were rich and happy versus people who were just rich. Victoria often came down to the lobby late at night, especially when she couldn't sleep. She would sit by the fountain in the building's small indoor garden area, reading or just thinking. David would see her there during his rounds, looking lost despite being surrounded by luxury. Sometimes she would nod at him, or offer a small smile. He always nodded back respectfully, but they had never really spoken. Their worlds were too different for that. This particular evening, Victoria seemed more troubled than usual. She had received another call from her father, reminding her that time was running out. The list of eligible bachelors he kept sending her was growing longer and more desperate. Each man was worse than the last, boring, arrogant, or so obviously interested in her money that it made her sick. The latest candidate was Richard Blackwood, a tech executive who had made his fortune creating apps that helped other rich people manage their wealth. He was handsome enough, well-educated, and came from old money. On paper, he was perfect. In person, he was insufferable. Richard treated everyone like servants, including Victoria herself. He expected her to be grateful for his attention and couldn't understand why she wasn't falling all over herself to marry him. During their last dinner date, he had snapped his fingers at the waiter and complained loudly when his steak wasn't cooked exactly right. "These people need to learn their place," he had said, not caring that everyone in the restaurant could hear him. Good help is so hard to find these days. Victoria had excused herself to the bathroom and called her driver to pick her up. She couldn't spend another minute listening to Richard's arrogant commentary on people he considered beneath him. But her father loved Richard. He saw dollar signs and business opportunities. The Blackwood family owned hotels across the country, and combining their companies would create an empire. Her personal feelings didn't matter in his calculations. As Victoria sat by the fountain that night, she noticed David making his security rounds. He walked quietly through the lobby, checking doors and making sure everything was secure. There was something graceful about the way he moved, like he was listening to music only he could hear. She wondered what his story was. Most doormen were older men who had worked these jobs for decades. David looked young, maybe her age, and something in his eyes suggested he had dreams bigger than this marble lobby. But she had never asked, and he had never offered. The building was quiet except for the soft sound of water trickling in the fountain. Victoria pulled out her phone and looked at the text messages from her father. 6 months had become 5 months, then 4. Now she had less than 3 months to find a husband or lose everything she had been raised to inherit. She looked across the lobby at David, who was politely helping an elderly resident with her packages. He was patient and kind, treating the woman with genuine respect. It struck her how different he was from the men her father wanted her to marry. Men like Richard who treated service workers like they were invisible. Victoria didn't know it yet, but her life was about to change in ways she never could have imagined. Sometimes the most important moments start with the smallest observations, like noticing how someone treats people when they think no one important is watching. The stage was set for a collision between two worlds that seemed impossibly far apart, but weren't really that different at all. 2 weeks later, the Meridian Tower buzzed with excitement. The annual charity gala was happening in the penthouse ballroom, and everyone who mattered in the city would be there. Victoria had tried to get out of attending, but her father insisted she go. More importantly, he insisted she bring Richard Blackwood as her date. Victoria stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting the emerald necklace that had belonged to her grandmother. The green stones matched her dress perfectly, but she felt like she was putting on armor for battle rather than getting ready for a party. She knew what tonight was really about. Her father wanted to announce her engagement to Richard in front of all their friends and business partners. The problem was, she hadn't agreed to marry Richard. In fact, she couldn't stand him. Downstairs in the building's staff area, David was getting ready for his own role in the evening. During big events like this, all the doormen worked extra hours to help with security and guest services. He would be stationed near the coat check area, making sure everything ran smoothly while staying invisible to the important guests. David straightened his tie and checked his appearance one last time. These events always made him feel strange, being so close to the world he once thought he might belong to, yet knowing he was just there to serve. 3 years ago, he might have been attending a gala like this as a performer. Now he would be taking coats and directing people to the bathroom. The ballroom on the top floor had been transformed into a winter wonderland. White flowers covered every surface and tiny lights sparkled like stars across the ceiling. A full orchestra played softly in one corner while guests mingled, champagne glasses in hand. The view of the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows was breathtaking. Victoria arrived fashionably late with Richard, who immediately started complaining about the valet service taking too long with his car. She smiled and nodded at the right moments, but her mind was elsewhere. Across the room, she spotted her father talking animatedly with several business partners. She knew he was planning something, and it probably involved her. "Victoria, darling, you look stunning tonight," said Mrs. Whitmore, one of her father's oldest friends. "And Richard, how handsome you both look together. I do hope we'll be hearing some exciting news soon." Richard squeezed Victoria's arm possessively. "Well, we'll just have to see what the future holds," he said with a knowing smile that made Victoria's stomach turn. The evening progressed, as these events always did. People talked about their recent vacations to exotic places, their new business ventures, and their children's achievements at expensive private schools. Victoria found herself counting the minutes until she could politely leave. Near the coat check area, David was helping an elderly woman find her missing scarf when he overheard a conversation that caught his attention. A young waitress had accidentally bumped into someone while serving drinks, spilling red wine on the man's expensive white jacket. "You clumsy idiot," the man shouted loud enough for half the ballroom to hear. "Do you have any idea how much this jacket cost?" "More than you make in a year, I guarantee it." David looked up to see Richard Blackwood berating the poor girl, who looked like she was about to cry. Other guests had stopped their conversations to watch the scene unfold. "I'm so sorry, sir," the waitress said, her voice shaking. "It was an accident. I'll pay for the cleaning." "Cleaning?" Richard laughed harshly. "This is ruined. You people have no business working around decent folks if you can't even carry a tray properly." Victoria had been across the room when the incident happened, but she hurried over as soon as she heard Richard's voice raised in anger. What she saw made her blood boil. Richard was humiliating this young woman in front of everyone, treating her like dirt because of an honest mistake. "Richard, stop," Victoria said firmly, stepping between him and the waitress. "It was an accident." "Stay out of this, Victoria," Richard snapped. "Someone needs to teach these servants their place." That was the final straw. Victoria had watched Richard treat people badly all evening, but this public humiliation was too much. The young waitress looked terrified, and other staff members were watching nervously, probably wondering if they would be next. "No, Richard," Victoria said, her voice carrying across the quiet ballroom. "Someone needs to teach you some basic human decency." Richard's face turned red with embarrassment and anger. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by a woman, and especially not in public. "How dare you? How dare I what?"
"Stand up to a bully?"
Victoria's voice grew stronger. "This young woman made an honest mistake, and you're treating her like garbage. That says everything about your character." The ballroom had gone completely quiet now. Everyone was watching the drama unfold between two of the city's most prominent young people. Victoria's father looked mortified from across the room. "Fine," Richard said, his voice dripping with venom. "If you want to defend the help, be my guest. But don't expect me to stick around and watch you make a fool of yourself." "Good," Victoria said, "because we're done. Whatever arrangement you thought we had, consider it over." Richard's eyes widened in shock. He hadn't expected Victoria to break up with him publicly. In his mind, she should be grateful that someone of his status was willing to marry her. "You'll regret this," he said quietly, but loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "You think you're better than everyone else, but you're just another spoiled rich girl. And these people," he gestured toward the waitress and other staff members, "they're all the same. Worthless, talentless nobodies who will never amount to anything." The cruelty in his words hung in the air like poison. Victoria felt sick that she had ever considered marrying this man. She looked around the ballroom at all the staff members who were just trying to do their jobs. The waiters, the security guards, the coat check attendant. That's when her eyes fell on David, who was standing quietly near the wall, having witnessed the entire scene. Something about his calm presence in the middle of all this chaos caught her attention. While everyone else looked uncomfortable or embarrassed, he seemed different somehow. An idea formed in Victoria's mind. A crazy, impulsive idea that she would normally never consider. But Richard's cruel words about talentless nobodies had pushed her past the point of rational thinking. "You know what, Richard?" she said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom. "You're wrong. Dead wrong." She looked directly at David, who seemed surprised to suddenly be the focus of attention. "You," she said, pointing at him. "What's your name?" David cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with all eyes on him. "David, miss. David, Victoria repeated. I bet you have more talent in your little finger than Richard has in his entire body. Richard laughed mockingly. Oh, please. What's he going to do, open a door really well? Victoria's grandmother's piano sat in the corner of the ballroom, mostly used as decoration during events. She had learned to play on that very piano as a child. It was one of the few things in her life that felt real and meaningful. See that piano? Victoria said, her voice getting stronger with each word. If David here can play something beautiful, something that moves me to tears, I'll marry him right here, right now. The ballroom erupted in whispers and gasps. Several people pulled out their phones, sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen. Richard stared at Victoria like she had completely lost her mind. Victoria's father started pushing through the crowd, clearly intending to stop whatever was happening before it went any further. But it was too late. The challenge had been made in front of hundreds of witnesses. Everyone was looking at David now, waiting to see what would happen next. David stood frozen, his heart pounding so hard he thought everyone could hear it. He hadn't touched a piano in 3 years. His fingers, once so confident on the keys, felt stiff and uncertain. But as he looked at Victoria's determined face and Richard's smug expression, something stirred inside him. Maybe it was time to stop being invisible. David's legs felt like they were made of lead as he walked across the ballroom floor. Every step seemed to echo in the silence, even though the thick carpet muffled his footsteps. Hundreds of eyes followed his movement toward the piano in the corner. He could hear whispers starting up behind him, people already making bets about what would happen next. His hands were shaking. He stuffed them into his pockets, hoping no one would notice. The last time he had played piano in front of people was at his senior recital 3 years ago. That felt like a lifetime ago, back when his biggest worry was whether he would get into a good graduate program. Victoria watched him walk toward the piano, suddenly wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. What if he couldn't play? What if she had just humiliated both of them in front of everyone she knew? Her father was pushing through the crowd now, his face red with anger. She could see him mouthing words she was grateful she couldn't hear. Richard stood with his arms crossed, a smug smile spreading across his face. This should be entertaining, he said to no one in particular. I can't wait to see how this disaster plays out. David reached the piano and stood there for a moment, staring down at the keys. The beautiful black Steinway was perfectly maintained, its surface so shiny he could see his reflection in it. He remembered the piano his parents had bought him for his 18th birthday. It wasn't nearly as nice as this one, but he had loved it more than anything in the world. He pulled out the bench and sat down, his heart hammering in his chest. The keys looked the same as they always had, 88 black and white rectangles that had once been his entire universe. But now they felt foreign, like trying to speak a language he had almost forgotten. The ballroom was so quiet he could hear the air conditioning humming overhead. Someone coughed nervously. A phone buzzed somewhere in the crowd. David closed his eyes and tried to remember what it felt like to play, really play, not just the simple melodies he sometimes hummed while working. Then, without quite meaning to, his right hand moved to middle C. Just one note, soft and clear. It rang out in the silence like a bell. The sound seemed to unlock something inside him that had been locked away for 3 years. His left hand joined his right, and suddenly, he was playing the opening notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. It was a piece he had worked on for months during his junior year, a piece that had challenged every skill he possessed. His fingers found the familiar patterns, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought failed him. At first, the notes came hesitantly, like he was testing whether the magic was still there. But as the melody began to unfold, something extraordinary happened. All the pain of the last 3 years, losing his parents, giving up his dreams, working nights to pay for his sister's education, all of it poured into the music. Victoria felt her breath catch in her throat. This wasn't the simple party trick she had expected. This was something beautiful and heartbreaking and real. The melody soared and dipped like a bird in flight, telling a story without words. Around the ballroom, conversations died completely. People who had been checking their phones put them away. The waitress who Richard had humiliated stopped in the doorway, her eyes wide with wonder. Even Victoria's father stopped pushing through the crowd and stood still, listening. David's fingers moved across the keys with growing confidence. The music seemed to pour out of him like water from a broken dam. Every note he had held back for 3 years, Every song he had hummed silently to himself while opening doors and carrying packages. It all came flowing out through this beautiful piano. The piece grew more complex, more emotional. His left hand played a deep rolling bass line while his right hand danced through the melody above. The technical difficulty was incredible, but David made it look effortless. This wasn't just someone who could play piano. This was someone who had spent years mastering their craft. Victoria found tears running down her cheeks before she realized she was crying. The music seemed to speak directly to her heart, telling her things about David that he had never put into words. She could hear his love for his family, his sacrifice, his dreams that he had set aside for duty, but she could also hear hope, still flickering like a candle flame that refused to go out. Richard's smug expression had completely disappeared. His mouth hung open slightly as he realized what he was witnessing. This wasn't some amateur fumbling through a simple song. This was a trained musician, someone with real talent, someone who could probably play circles around anyone Richard knew. The music built to a crescendo that seemed to fill every corner of the ballroom. David's whole body was involved now, swaying slightly with the rhythm, his face showing the emotion of every note. He had completely forgotten about the audience, lost in the world of the music just like he used to be during practice sessions that lasted for hours. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman from the 15th floor who always asked David about his sister, had tears streaming down her face. She whispered to her husband, "I knew there was something special about that young man." Even the other staff members had stopped their work to listen. The security guards, the waiters, the coat check attendants, they all stood transfixed by the music pouring from their colleagues' fingers. They had worked alongside David for 3 years without knowing he possessed this incredible gift. As the piece moved toward its conclusion, David's playing became even more passionate, more personal. This was his story he was telling, the story of a young man who had lost everything and found the strength to keep going, who had sacrificed his own dreams to make sure someone else could achieve theirs. The final notes rang out in the silence, hanging in the air like stars. David's hands remained on the keys for a moment as if he couldn't quite believe what had just happened. Then he slowly lifted them and looked up at the crowd for the first time since he had started playing. The ballroom was completely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. It was as if the entire room was still under the spell of the music. Then, like thunder after lightning, the applause began. It started with Mrs. Patterson clapping slowly, deliberately. Then Victoria joined in, her hands coming together with tears still streaming down her face. One by one, the entire ballroom erupted in applause that seemed to go on forever. People were cheering, wiping their eyes, talking excitedly to their neighbors about what they had just witnessed. Phone cameras that had been recording throughout the performance were still capturing every moment. Someone shouted, "Bravo!" from the back of the room. David sat at the piano bench, overwhelmed by the response. He had forgotten what it felt like to share music with other people, to see how it could move them and touch them. For 3 years, music had been something private, something he kept locked away. Now it was alive again, connecting him to all these strangers in a way that words never could. Victoria walked toward him through the crowd, her emerald dress catching the light from the chandeliers overhead. The look in her eyes was different now. Not the polite recognition she had shown him in the lobby, but something deeper. She had seen past his uniform, past his job title, past all the barriers that usually kept their worlds separate. When she reached the piano, she stopped just a few feet away from him. The applause was still going on around them, but it seemed to fade into the background. "That was beautiful," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but somehow audible despite all the noise. "The most beautiful thing I've ever heard." David stood up from the bench, suddenly very aware that he was still wearing his doorman's uniform while she looked like a princess from a fairy tale. But something had changed between them in those few minutes of music. Something that couldn't be unchanged. The video went viral overnight. Someone at the gala had recorded David's entire performance on their phone, and by morning, it was spreading across social media like wildfire. "Doorman's secret talent shocks high society," read one headline. "Hidden genius playing piano will make you cry," said another. David woke up in his small apartment to find his phone buzzing with notifications he couldn't understand. Text messages from numbers he didn't recognize. Voicemails from people claiming to be talent agents and music producers. His sister Amy was calling from medical school. her voice excited and confused. "David, are you seeing this? You're all over the internet. My roommate showed me this video of you playing piano at some fancy party. When did this happen? Why didn't you tell me?" David sat on the edge of his bed staring at his phone screen. The video had been viewed over 1,000,000 times in just 12 hours. Comments poured in from people around the world, praising his talent and asking who he was. Someone had even started a hashtag, Doorman Pianist. He felt overwhelmed and exposed. For 3 years he had been invisible, just another face in the service industry. Now strangers were dissecting his life online, trying to figure out his story. Meanwhile, 40 floors above, Victoria was dealing with her own chaos. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing since she woke up. Her father had already called 6 times, demanding an explanation for her behavior at the gala. The society pages were having a field day with the story of the wealthy heiress who had publicly dumped her wealthy boyfriend and promised to marry a doorman, Victoria Sterling's piano promise was trending on social media alongside David's performance video. Most people seemed to be on her side, praising her for standing up to Richard and recognizing David's talent. But the comments from people in her social circle were less kind. Her father finally showed up at her apartment that afternoon, his face red with anger and embarrassment. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he shouted the moment she opened the door. "The whole city is talking about our family like we're some kind of circus act." "Good," Victoria said calmly, leading him into her living room. "Maybe people will finally see what really matters. What really matters is the family business. What really matters is your responsibility to this family." Her father paced back and forth across her marble floor. "Richard's family is furious. They're talking about backing out of our hotel deal. Do you understand what that could cost us?" Victoria poured herself a cup of coffee and didn't offer one to her father. "Richard showed his true character last night. If his family wants to punish us for me not wanting to marry a bully, then maybe they're not the kind of people we should be doing business with. You promised to marry the doorman. In front of everyone." "His name is David," Victoria said firmly. "And yes, I made that promise. He fulfilled his part of the bargain beautifully." Her father stared at her like she had completely lost her mind. "You cannot be serious about this." "Why not? You said I had to get married. You never said it had to be to someone you approved of." For the next several days, Victoria found herself thinking about David constantly. She started paying attention to his work schedule, finding reasons to be in the lobby when he was on duty. But their interactions were awkward now. The easy invisibility they had both relied on was gone, replaced by a strange awareness that they were now connected in the public eye. David seemed different too. More reserved, almost nervous around her. She could tell he was uncomfortable with all the attention the video had brought him. One evening, she found him sitting by the fountain in the lobby's garden area during his break, looking exhausted. The space was empty except for the two of them. "Mind if I sit?" she asked. David looked surprised but nodded to the bench beside him. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the sound of water trickling over the fountain's stones. "I'm sorry," Victoria said finally. "For what? For putting you in this situation? For making that crazy promise without asking if you wanted to be part of it?" She turned to look at him. "I was angry at Richard and I acted without thinking. Now your whole life is upside down because of me." David was quiet for a long moment. "You know what the strangest part is? I haven't played piano like that in 3 years. I thought I had lost it completely. But when I sat down at that bench, it all came flooding back. Why did you stop playing?" So David told her the whole story. About his parents, the accident, dropping out of school to take care of Amy. About selling his piano and taking whatever work he could find. About the dreams he had set aside to make sure his sister could pursue hers. Victoria listened without interrupting, her heart breaking for everything he had sacrificed. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Your sister is lucky to have you," she said finally. "I'm lucky to have her. She's going to be an amazing doctor." David smiled, and Victoria could see how proud he was. "She called me yesterday, completely freaking out about the video. She had no idea I could still play like that." "What did you tell her?" "That sometimes we surprise ourselves with what we're capable of when we really need to." Over the next few weeks, Victoria and David began having these late-night conversations by the fountain. She would come down from her penthouse and he would take his breaks and they would talk about everything and nothing. She learned that he was taking business classes online, hoping to eventually start his own company. He learned that she had studied art history in college and dreamed of opening a gallery that featured work by unknown artists. They discovered they both loved old movies and terrible puns. They argued about books and laughed about the strangest residents in the building. Slowly, carefully, they were becoming friends. The media attention around them gradually died down, but the offers kept coming for David. Record labels wanted to meet with him. Concert venues were reaching out. A talent agent had been calling every day, promising to make him famous. David turned them all down. "Why?" Victoria asked one night. "This could be your chance to get back to music professionally." "Because it doesn't feel right," David said. 3 years ago, I would have killed for opportunities like this. But now, I have responsibilities. Amy still has 2 more years of medical school. I can't just abandon my job and hope everything works out. Victoria understood. But it made her sad to think of all that talent being wasted in a job that didn't challenge him. That's when she started researching David's background more carefully. She discovered articles about his performances from his student days, reviews that praised his exceptional technical skill and emotional depth. She found his senior recital program online and watched grainy recordings of his earlier performances. She also looked into music programs in the city, scholarships for adult students and part-time degree options. An idea was forming in her mind, but she wasn't sure if David would accept help from her. Their relationship was complicated now. There was the public promise she had made, which neither of them had mentioned directly. There was the obvious difference in their financial situations. And there was something else, something neither of them wanted to name yet, the growing feeling that their late-night conversations were the best part of both their days. Victoria found herself counting the hours until she could see David again, until they could sit by the fountain and talk about their dreams and fears and all the small details that make up a life. She had never felt this comfortable with anyone before, this understood, but she also knew that David was holding back, keeping a careful distance between them. Whether it was because of their different social positions, or because he felt obligated to her after the gala incident, she couldn't tell. What she did know was that she was falling in love with the man behind the uniform, and she had no idea what to do about it. 3 months after the gala, everything changed again. David was working his usual night shift when his phone rang. The caller ID showed his sister Amy's number, but when he answered, he could barely understand her through her excited tears. "David. Oh my God, David, you're not going to believe this." Amy's voice was shaking with emotion. "I just got a call from the New York Symphony Orchestra. They want to meet with you." David nearly dropped his phone. "What? That's impossible. I never applied anywhere." "Someone sent them the video of you playing at that party. The conductor saw it and wants to audition you for their piano section." "David, this is huge. This is everything you always dreamed of." After Amy hung up, David stood in the empty lobby, staring at his phone. The New York Symphony Orchestra was one of the most prestigious orchestras in the world. Getting a position there would mean financial security, artistic fulfillment, and a chance to return to the life he had given up 3 years ago. But it would also mean leaving his job at the Meridian Tower, leaving Victoria. Over the past months, their friendship had grown into something deeper. Though neither of them had said it out loud, their late-night conversations had become the highlight of David's days. Victoria was nothing like the spoiled rich girl he had expected her to be. She was intelligent, funny, and surprisingly down-to-earth despite her wealth. More importantly, she saw him as a person, not just someone who opened doors for a living. The next evening, David found Victoria sitting by the fountain as usual. She looked troubled, staring into the water with a frown on her face. "Everything okay?" he asked, sitting down beside her. Victoria sighed. "My father's deadline is next week. 3 months to find a husband, remember? He's been parading eligible bachelors in front of me every day, each one worse than the last. What happens if you don't choose someone? I lose everything. The inheritance, my trust fund, my position in the company. Everything goes to charity instead." She looked at him with sad eyes. "Not that it matters much. I'm starting to think maybe I don't want any of it anyway." David wanted to tell her about the orchestra opportunity, but something held him back. If she knew he was leaving, would she feel pressured to make a decision about her father's ultimatum? Would she think he was abandoning her? "There's something I need to tell you," Victoria said suddenly. About that night at the gala. About the promise I made. David's heart started beating faster. They had been carefully avoiding this topic for months. I know it was crazy and impulsive, and I know you never asked to be put in that situation, Victoria continued. But I want you to know that it wasn't just anger talking. When I heard you play, when I saw who you really are. She paused, gathering courage. I meant it, David. If you wanted to, I would marry you. The words hung in the air between them like a bridge neither of them knew how to cross. David felt his chest tighten with emotion. Victoria, he started, but she held up her hand. I'm not asking you to say yes. I know this is all complicated and weird, but I needed you to know that my feelings are real. What we have, these conversations, this connection, it's the most genuine thing in my life. David looked into her eyes and saw the same feelings he had been trying to hide from himself. He was in love with her. Completely, hopelessly in love with this woman, who could have anyone in the world but somehow cared about him. That's when he told her about the orchestra. Victoria's face went through a dozen different emotions as he explained about the audition, the opportunity, what it could mean for his future. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. You have to take it, she said finally, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. Victoria, no, David, this is your dream. This is what you gave up for your sister. And now you have a chance to get it back. I won't be the reason you lose it again. But what about your father's deadline? What about, how do you forget about all that? Victoria smiled, though it looked like it was breaking her heart. My problems aren't your responsibility. You've already sacrificed enough for other people. They sat in silence, both knowing that this conversation was changing everything between them. The easy friendship they had built was dissolving into something more painful and complicated. I don't want to leave you, David said quietly. I don't want you to go either, but sometimes loving someone means wanting what's best for them, even if it hurts. The audition was scheduled for the following week, the same day as Victoria's father's deadline. David spent every free moment practicing on the piano in his apartment building's community room, preparing pieces he hadn't played in years. Meanwhile, Victoria was dealing with increasing pressure from her father. He had arranged a meeting with Robert Hayes, a banker's son who was perfect husband material according to the Sterling family standards. Robert was polite, well-educated, and completely boring. He talked about golf and stock prices with the same enthusiasm most people reserved for discussing the weather. He's a wonderful young man, her father insisted after the meeting. Stable, reliable, from a good family. What more could you want, love? Victoria suggested. Love is a luxury, Victoria. Marriage is a business partnership. 2 days before the deadline, Victoria made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She called a press conference. Standing in the lobby of the Meridian Tower surrounded by reporters and cameras, Victoria Sterling announced that she was giving up her inheritance voluntarily. I've spent my whole life trying to live up to other people's expectations, she said, her voice clear and strong. But I've learned that real wealth isn't about money in the bank. It's about being true to yourself and the people you care about. The reporters shouted questions about her father's reaction, about her future plans, about the doorman she had promised to marry. Victoria answered them calmly and honestly. David Chen is one of the most talented and genuine people I've ever met. His musical gift is extraordinary, but that's not why I care about him. I care about him because he's kind, hardworking, and selfless. He gave up his dreams to take care of his family, and now he has a chance to pursue them again. I support that completely. But what about your promise to marry him? One reporter called out. Victoria smiled. That promise was made in anger without his consent. Real love doesn't come from public declarations or family pressure. It comes from choice, freely made. The story dominated the news cycle for days. Sterling heiress gives up fortune for love, read the headlines. Some people called her crazy. Others praised her courage. David watched the press conference from his apartment, feeling a mixture of admiration and heartbreak. Victoria had just given up billions of dollars, and somehow she had managed to do it while setting him free from any obligation to her. His audition with the orchestra went perfectly. Years of suppressed musical passion poured out through his fingers, and the conductor offered him a position on the spot. But as David sat in the subway afterwards, heading back to what might be his last shift as a doorman, he realized something important. All his life, he had thought success meant achieving his dreams. But Victoria had shown him that real success meant choosing love over fear, authenticity over expectations, and connection over convenience. The orchestra position would wait. First, he had something more important to do. He had a promise to make, freely chosen this time to the woman who had given up everything to set him free.